I kept pictures of Nelson Mandela behind my locker, where nobody would think that it's there.
That's Thembela Kepe, a professor of human geography at the University of Toronto. For Kepe, being a professor and teaching students about his idol Nelson Mandela is a huge privilege. Kepe was born in the Eastern Cape province in South Africa, where growing up as a person of color was not easy.
Very simple things that we don't think about that were denied people in South Africa because of their skin color. Using the bathroom. If you are in the wrong part of town, you cannot use that bathroom because it's for whites only. And even if nature is calling, you cannot. So simple things like that. If you want to go to the beach, there was a beach for whites, a beach for blacks.
And the pain and struggles weren't just emotional.
I was beaten up. I lost a year of my life because I was beaten up. I was a student in high school and the army came and beat the heck out of us. And so I was out. I'm fortunate that I'm standing here now. So I don't count that as suffering because there were people who suffered more than me.
Kepe eventually left South Africa at the age of 15 because of the political climate and moved to Canada. But when he reflects back on his life in South Africa,
one thing that kept us alive in South Africa, under very difficult circumstances, was hope.
And Mandela was a big part of that hope. Mandela lived in Cape Town in the same province as Kepe.
We used to have pictures of Nelson Mandela, but we had to hide them because if we were found with pictures or his writings and so on, we could go to jail ourselves because nobody could totally embrace Nelson Mandela without risking their own lives.
This was because Mandela was fighting against apartheid in the country. Apartheid was an institutionalized racial segregation structure that existed in South Africa and Southwest Africa from 1948 until the early 1990s. Mandela was one of the first to call for armed resistance to apartheid through his political party, the African National Congress, or ANC. He encouraged anti-apartheid protests and encouraged Black South Africans to fight against the government's racial segregation laws. Eventually, the government banned Mandela and his political party, ANC, after several of their demonstrations turned violent. In response to the ban, Mandela left South Africa and continued building support for his party from abroad. The South African government charged Mandela with incitement and illegally leaving the country once he returned, sentencing him to 5 years in prison. That sentence was then extended to a life sentence.
He was seen as a terrorist, as somebody who was plotting to overthrow the state. But for the rest of South Africans, people like me, he was sent to prison for fighting for rights of everybody in South Africa. He enjoyed suffering when there was little gain for himself.
Supporters of Mandela continued his fight by pressuring the government with anti-apartheid demonstrations.
It was as close as you could get from a civil war.
In 1989, a new president was elected, F.W. de Klerk. South Africa started seeing more peace and an end towards apartheid. And on February 11, 1990, de Klerk decided to release Mandela from his life sentence. Supporters of Mandela around the world watched him walk free after serving 27 years in prison.
Let each one of you and all of our people give the enemies of peace and liberty no space to take us back to the dark hell of apartheid.
I witnessed it on television. I remember it was Sunday. I got together with my friends and we watched it. It was a good moment, a moment of hope. It symbolized a beginning of a journey to emancipation, to freedom.
4 years later, in 1994, Mandela was elected as the first Black president of South Africa.
Becoming a president of a country that thought that Black people or people of color are nothing. For that person to be the leader of that country was something.
Mandela died in 2013 at the age of 95. Kepe says even though Mandela is gone, many people around the world like himself have continued Mandela's fight in their own unique ways, even 30 years after Mandela was released from prison. Thank you for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the latest breaking national and international news, be sure to subscribe to our channel, where we also dig into big issues around the world in our weekly series, Global News Explains.